Yes guys, this is a Halo Spartan you see before you, and no, it's not a Space Marine for all my long time subscribers. So let me explain why I painted a Halo Spartan. About 6 months ago I seen a really cool video on, I think it was Todd McFarlane's channel, showing you how they go about making action figures, and this one was specifically about Halo, and seeing the action figure in its prototype form unpainted, I thought how cool would it be to actually paint your own Halo Spartan, and that's where I am in this video. Now this video is literally taking you from start to finish on how you can go about painting your own custom Spartan. So this is a long video. Grab yourself a nice hot cuppa, and hopefully there'll be some tips and tricks regarding airbrushing that you'll pick up along the way, and it'll be worth the long video watch. So let's get started. Master Chief comes in a really nice box. That's what she said. Katana, that is. Okay, sorry about the bad joke guys, but no, the packaging's great. But the most important thing is the action figure is amazing. For the price I paid for it, which was a little under £10 in the UK, all the joints have got ratchets. There's ball joints so the wrist can swivel round, and the articulation's just amazing. I didn't have action figures like this when I was a kid. I was lucky if the arms moved up and down. There's a little bit of work needed before I can start airbrushing. There's some seam lines running down the Master Chief's helmet and on his leg. Also there's some unsightly holes where extra weapons can be fitted onto the sides of his legs and in his backpack, but I don't have extra weapons, so I'm going to plug those with a little bit of modelling putty. Here I'm using the hobby knife just to scrape along that seam line. Can sometimes scratch into the plastic that you don't want to. So here I'm just smoothing it all out with 1000 grit sandpaper. This is a comparison of what it looks like after removing the seam line down the helmet and what it looks like with the seam line still intact. So it only took about a minute to actually remove that, and it will definitely improve the overall look of the Spartan armour once it's been painted. For those unfamiliar with green stuff, it's really easy to work with. What you do, you cut up a little strip of 50% of the yellow and 50% of the blue. You mix it together and that forms the green stuff. I'll sped up the footage. It actually takes about a minute or two in real time. You want to make sure that you're left with no yellow or blue and you've got a nice even green colour. Once I'd thoroughly mixed it, I pulled off a little blob, rolled it into a ball, ready to push straight into that hole. Now I'm not using any hobby tools here like a sculpting tool or clay shapers. You can actually do this nice and easy, as it's only a tiny little gap that we plug in just with your fingers. It's really a good idea to wet your finger if you're actually trying to place the green stuff on something. It'll do two things. One, it'll make it really easy to manipulate the green stuff without it sticking to your finger, and also it won't leave fingerprint marks in the green stuff which would really show up in the painting stage and not look too good. Just remove the excess with a hobby knife, and that's the end result. I have finished tidying up the Halo Spartan, and now it's time for the fun to begin, airbrushing. I turn on the airbrush compressor and I dial it in at 20 psi so I can begin priming. All the airbrushing that you see in this video will be done using my brand new TRN1 airbrush. This was kindly given to me by Awata from airbrushes.com to review. Hopefully by the end of this video I'll be able to show you how well the TRN1 performs and also go over some of the key features. But for most of the technical specifications, please check the link in the description box below where you can find out more about the TRM1. Just testing some of the primer to see how smoothly it's spraying out the airbrush on a scrap piece of paper. Here I'm holding the airbrush about 4 to 6 inches away from the Spartan, and in sweeping motions I'm pulling the trigger back on the airbrush pretty far, so I'm getting a nice wide spray field of paint. Priming is really straightforward and simple. The most important thing to take into consideration is keep your airbrush moving, don't focus on one spot, and if the model starts to look a little wet, stop immediately. The last thing you want to do is oversaturate the model with wet paint. That's when it leads to drips and unsightly marks. I very rarely have to take my airbrushes apart these days, guys, to clean them, and I find the best way to eliminate that is to clean out the paintbrush cup between each paint change. So here I've just dumped out a load of water to get rid of most of that primer. I add a few drops of airbrush cleaner just to get rid of those last bits of paint particles. No, I've not gone mad. I'm actually cutting up this old t-shirt for a good reason. I'm cutting up strips of the t-shirt to use as cleaning cloths for my airbrush cup. It cleans inside of the airbrush cup much better than tissue paper and kitchen roll, and more importantly, it's not going to scratch or damage that nice smooth surface that you get on quality airbrushes. One of the really cool features of the TRM1 airbrush is it comes with a spare airbrush cup in the box. The smaller airbrush cup is absolutely perfect for fine detail painting, as you're able to see straight over the top of the airbrush exactly what you're painting, and also it's more economic with how much paint you put in there. I'm now going to be painting fine detail on the Halo Spartan, so I drop down the pressure to 14 psi. Just like the primer before, I'm testing to see how the paint's actually coming out of the airbrush on a spare piece of paper, but here I'm actually going into a bit more detail to see how fine the lines are coming out of the airbrush and making sure I've not got any paint spatters just before I actually start painting the Spartan. Here you see that I've started to pre-shade the Halo Spartan. Pre-shading involves adding shaded areas to all the areas of the Spartan armour where you feel a shadow would fall. So I'm holding the airbrush further away and pulling down slightly more on the trigger for lighter, more feathered shading, which you'll see that I'm doing here on the bottom side of that chest plate. And also you'll see I'm doing it on the back area of his shoulders. But where a panel meets the next panel and I want a nice sharp dark line, I'm getting in much closer with the airbrush and pulling a lot lighter on the trigger to get a much more fine line. I'll spend about 15 minutes going over each and every panel on the Halo Spartan, creating those shaded areas. It's going to really pay off when we start laying down the colour later on, as some of that shadow shows straight through the colour and it's really going to make it pop. And this is what the Halo Spartan looks like after the pre-shading stage has been completed. After finishing the pre-shading stage, I'm actually now highlighting the model. I don't think there's actually a technical term for this, so I'm just going to call it pre-highlighting, because that's what I'm doing. I'm looking for key areas on the Halo Spartan armor where I think natural highlights would form, so on the tops of his halo, on the top parts of his chest plate. I'm also highlighting areas where I may have been a bit overzealous with the pre-shading and gone a bit too far. If you look closely at the front peak of his helmet, you'll notice that I'm putting an extreme highlight towards the front. Now that will probably look a little unnatural, but it'll look cool, and that's what I'm looking for. Here you can see that I've took the needle cap off the airbrush so I can really get in there and find those tiny little panels to highlight. I really don't recommend this if you've just started airbrushing, as you can easily ding the airbrush needle. When spraying fine detail at low PSI, you're probably going to get a dry tip. What that is a build-up of paint that's dried on the needle, and it will really give you poor performance. What I do is put some Q-tips or cotton buds in a little pot with some airbrush cleaner, and once they're all soaked in that airbrush cleaner, I twiddle them from the back of the needle towards the front, and easily in seconds it removes all of that paint without the risk of trying to peel it with your finger, dinging the needle or jabbing yourself in the finger. Liquid masks are a great thing that I discovered a while back. By adding a liquid mask to your models, you can easily use multiple passes of different colours without the risk or worry of one colour bleeding into the next. On the peak of the cap here, I want to leave the white behind, so it adds like a cool contrast between all the blue that I'm going to be adding later on. This is where all that work in the pre-shading and the pre-highlighting really pays off. As you can see on the camera, as I'm actually laying down that blue paint, you can actually see the shadows being left behind and some of the lighter areas on the armour from the blue. And also some of those areas where the pre-shading was a little bit iffy are covered up by the blue, so it's win-win in both scenarios. I've sped the footage up here, and I'm not going to talk for a while. I'm just going to show you the accumulation of what it will look like once you put down your base colour on top of that pre-shading and pre-highlighting. I've added a few drops of light sky blue to my airbrush cup that still had the French blue in it, and I'm putting very subtle highlights on the armour. I have to be very careful here because you can easily go over the top and make it look very airbrushy. What I mean by that, you can actually start making the finish look cloudy. So sometimes less is more, so I only put very subtle highlights with this paint mix on. After finishing up all the painting of the blue on the armour, it's time to remove that mask. I very gently just nick it with the hobby knife there, and the rest can just be peeled away with your finger nice and easily. And there you go. The white strip is absolutely perfectly left intact. Now to really make things pop, I'm going to actually be filling in the panel lines. Some people call it a pin wash, some people call it a panel line wash. And basically what I'm doing, I'm adding Vallejo model colour wash, and I have to emphasise it's the new style of washes that work way better than the old style. When you actually touch it in the panel lines, you'll actually see the capillary action of the brush will just literally pull that paint straight down into those panel lines. Don't worry if it looks a little messy. These washes are designed to be easily cleaned up with a little bit of water. Here I purposely make a mess of the panel and put too much wash on. I dip my brush in some clean water, and as you can see now, I just literally knock it back and it removes the excess paint. Add a little bit more water and I just feather it out. If you notice at the start of the video, the helmet visor is actually black, but in the video I actually painted silver. When I come to recording the actual finalised part in the photo booth, the silver was playing havoc with my camera, so I decided to paint the visor black. So the option's yours. You can either paint it in the chrome colour, which is highly reflective and looks quite cool, or you can paint it in black. If you do go with the black variation, it's brilliant to actually finish it off with a gloss varnish finish. I've started to paint the soft body armour of the Halo Spartan. I could have masked off the armour plating and airbrushed the soft bodied armour, but as it's going to be a flat matte colour and there's not going to be much highlighting, it was just extra hassle that's unneeded. The live colour paint that I'm using now is absolutely fantastic. This is undiluted straight out of the pot and it goes down super smooth and gives almost one coat coverage. After finishing painting all the soft body armour, it's time to actually pick out some of those panel lines. But this time around, rather than just actually touching the wash into the panels, I'm actually going over all of the soft body armour. Also, I painted some areas of interest on the armour silver. They're also getting a wash. After letting the wash thoroughly dry, I start going back over the top surfaces of all the panels. What this will do, it will leave that nice wash in the recesses, and it will really accentuate the curvature of the soft body armour and really make them stand out and pop. If you notice as I'm painting, I'm not coming straight down with the paintbrush like you would do with a pen. I'm actually painting slightly off to the side. What this enables me to do is to actually paint all those soft body armour panels, but also it's really hard for me to make a mistake and painting those panel lines on the soft body armour, as the side of the brush would just skim straight over them. This is a good example of what I mean. By painting slightly off to the side, I'm able to just paint the top surfaces of those knuckles, but I'm actually missing the grooves to leave the shading behind. I'm going to add some interest to the armour by adding some chips where the armour's been slightly worn and it's gone back down to the prime colour. Sponge chipping is really simple to do and it's really fun, to be quite honest guys. Sometimes I get a little bit carried away, to be quite honest. It's easily done by dipping the sponge into undiluted paint. I then stipple it on some kitchen roll to remove most of it, and then it leaves a really nice natural organic pattern, as if the armour had started to chip and break away. Before actually placing the sponge on the model and starting to chip away, I highly recommend spending a couple of minutes to see how the organic patterns are forming on some kitchen roll. If you don't like the chip patterns that you're getting with the sponge, tear off a little bit more, or make sure that the sponge is a little bit drier, or the sponge is a little bit wetter. After experimenting with a minute or two, you'll really get an understanding of the actual organic patterns that you can get from the sponge. Here I've got some French blue and some light sky blue on a palette, and I'm slightly mixing the colour in just so it's not too light. And what I'm about to do now is really make those paint chips look 3D by adding an edge highlight to them. It's important to make the 3D effect look believable that you make sure that you follow the same direction of the highlight on all of the chips. So if you decide that you're going to be painting the highlight from the bottom towards the left, each chip needs to be painted from the bottom towards the left. But whichever direction you decide that the highlight's coming from, each chip has to have the same highlight placed in the same direction. After finishing up highlighting all of the paint chips, I'm starting to highlight the armour now. All of the sharp edges of the panels are going to be picked out with that same highlight colour. I've actually changed brushes over now to a 00 Winsor & Newton series brush, and you can see that there's only paint right on the tip of the brush. So a subtle edge highlight on the panels will look way better than a big thick line. So the more subtle you are, the better the overall look will be. I actually constantly change the angle of the Spartan to make sure that the side of my brush is actually hitting the sharp angle of the armour that I intend to paint. What this actually does is it does all the hard work for me. It enables me to get a straight, smooth line by just gliding the paintbrush from the side straight onto the panel. And here you can see me doing this. I follow the natural angle of the panel line with the side of the brush. This is another little touch that will really sell the look of the overall Spartan once it's finished. No bullets can travel out of a block barrel, so I drill a hole in the barrel to make it look more realistic. The gun run's really simple and straightforward to paint. I didn't need to add much detail to it because unlike the armour, it's not going to be getting really strong shadows or highlights. After finishing all the paint work, I seal it in with a satin varnish to protect it. And this is the end result of the custom painted Halo Spartan, which had an absolute blast in doing. I want to dedicate this video to my mother-in-law and to my daughter Darian. They've both had a very difficult 2013, and they've really inspired me and showed me that even when things are looking bad, to always keep your chin up and persevere. I also want to thank all my subscribers, all my old subscribers and all my new subscribers. I know I don't upload videos as much as I used to, guys, but like I said in my previous videos, I'm not going anywhere and I still will upload videos in the future. So thank you. If you really enjoyed this video, guys, don't forget to click the like button. And if you've got a comment or you'd like to see something interesting in the future, I might take it into consideration. So don't forget to put a comment down in the comment box below. And lastly, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.